The original Mega Man X is definitely one of my 5 favorite video games of all time. In fact, depending on what day you ask me, it might actually be my number 1. Now real quick, in case you're wondering what the difference is between Mega Man X and the plain vanilla Mega Man, it's about 100 years. The X series is set in the same world but in the future of the original series. It's kind of unclear whether X is an upgraded version of the original Mega Man or an entirely different character, but either way, he was created by Dr. Light from the classic series and then put into hypersleep because Dr. Light didn't think the world was ready for him or something like that. I don't know, that part wasn't really explained very well either. The point is, Mega Man X is set in the future, and in the future, everything is basically the same, but better. He still fights 8 elemental themed bosses, although in this series they are referred to as Mavericks. One of the things I love about the X series is that all the boss characters are animals, which was a refreshing change from the endless series of attribute mans from the original series. There's also more of a focus on speed and mobility in the X series. X starts out the game being able to wall climb and very quickly learns the ability to dash. He also uses a charge shot, which was a mechanic I definitely took issue with when it was introduced to the original series, because I think it kind of broke the game a little bit. The main gimmick of the Mega Man series is that you collected a specific weapon from a defeated boss, which was then effective against one of the other bosses. Pretty much an 8-stage version of rock, paper, scissors. But once the charge shot was introduced, it didn't really matter whether you had the appropriate weapon or not, because you always had the charge shot, which had the added benefit of never running out of ammo. In the Mega Man X series, X starts out the game very underpowered compared to the Maverick characters. I mean, look how much smaller his life bar is here. So the charge shot in the X series doesn't give you so much an edge as it slightly levels the playing field. X isn't underpowered for long, however. In each stage you can find a hidden heart tank that will permanently increase your life bar. You can also find secret capsules hidden away by Dr. Light that will augment your abilities further, like body armor that increases defense, and even an upgrade to your arm cannon that will let you charge up your sub-weapons. Another thing I love about the game is that the levels themselves change slightly depending on the order that you defeat the Mavericks in. For example, the first time you go into Flame Mammoth stage, the stage is filled with lava, or molten metal, I guess. But come back after you defeat Chill Penguin and everything is iced over, which will let you easily grab this heart tank. Most of the stages are linked together this way, and this was ingenious. The story also takes itself much more seriously than the original series. X is, for better or worse, an emotional character who doesn't really want to fight, but is drawn into combat by the series antagonist, Sigma, who is basically an extra evil version of Magneto from the X-Men series. This dichotomy definitely becomes more melodramatic and, let's be honest, comical as the series went on, but it does give the X series more of a grown-up tone than the happy-go-lucky silliness of the original games. Without hyperbole, I would say that the original Mega Man X is a perfect game. This is Capcom at their best, with amazing graphics, fantastic character design, and an awesome soundtrack that is as metal as the limited Super Nintendo hardware could allow. Mega Man X was a masterpiece. Not only one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, but probably one of the best games of all time. But I'm sure you already know that. So how did Capcom follow this up? Well, in true Capcom fashion, by pressing Ctrl-C and then Ctrl-V. Except that's not entirely accurate. What they actually did was this. So you know how when you make a copy of something, the copy is never quite as good as the original? That's how I feel about Mega Man X2. It was basically the same game all over again, except not as good. The character designs were weaker, and the music was noticeably worse. The stages were no longer affected by one another, which in itself didn't necessarily make the game any worse, but it did just kind of underline the fact that not as much thought went into X2's design. But there were other elements from the original game that were carried over, and these basically became mainstays of the series. It wouldn't be a Mega Man X game if you weren't collecting heart tanks to upgrade your life bar, or discovering Dr. Light capsules to upgrade your abilities. These were just little nuggets of depth and complexity that made the original Mega Man X feel fresh and exciting compared to the classic Mega Man games. But methodically repeating these same elements game after game very quickly had the effect of making the X sequels feel extremely formulaic. And for me, that started with X2. Mega Man X3 was again more of the same. Capcom didn't even develop this game themselves. Most of the work was done by Minakuchi Engineering, who were the ones who had developed most of the Mega Man games on the Game Boy, as well as the Wily Wars on the Sega Genesis. These guys definitely know Mega Man, and they did a good job on X3. The music and character designs were a definite improvement over X2, but I did say they did a good job on this game. They didn't do a great one. One of my main issues with X3 is that it pretty much doubles the amount of secret doodads hidden in the Maverick stages, which doesn't really add much to the game. All it really does is stack an additional layer of upgrades that are required to access the rest of the upgrades in the game. Now this, combined with the fact that this is probably the hardest of the 3 Super Nintendo X games, means that you're spending a lot more time just spinning your wheels. This is where the X series started to get a little tedious. With Mega Man X4, the series moved from the Super Nintendo to the Sony PlayStation, and this game was really good. You could choose to play through the game as either X or his partner Zero. Each character had his own storyline, complete with gloriously cheesy anime cutscenes.
No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
All the other expected elements were in place, of course. You still hunted down heart tanks and Dr. Light capsules for X, but the game itself was shorter and felt more streamlined than the previous game. Now there was kind of an explosion of Mega Man games around this time because Capcom was promoting Mega Man's 10th anniversary. Mega Man X4 came out pretty much at the same time as Mega Man 8, and both games used animated cutscenes. What I didn't like about this though, is that they used the same voice actor for Mega Man in both games. For one thing, it doesn't make any sense. I was under the impression that Mega Man and Mega Man X were 2 different characters, so why would they have the same voice? Also, it meant that X sounded like this.
Zero, if I become a Maverick, you have to take care of me.
Don't be ridiculous.
Mega Man X4 wasn't quite as good as the original X game, but for a hot minute it did seem like Capcom had reinvigorated the series, and I was excited to see what they would come up with next. Mega Man X5 was again more of the same. They took out the animated cutscenes and replaced them with stills over text. It also seemed like they reused a lot of ideas and assets from X4. I mean, look at this. Capcom also apparently decided that anyone who was playing X5 had probably never played another video game before, so they created a new character to teach you the complicated mechanics of running, shooting, and jumping over pits. Every time there's a moderately new element in the game, any kind of new obstacle, the game literally stops so Alia can come on screen and tell you all about it. This happens constantly. There are still 8 Mavericks to choose from at the beginning of the game, but it's heavily suggested that you just focus on these 4 if you want to progress the story. If you select any of the other 4, Alia will tell you that you can do what you want, but you're just wasting your time. You start the game with what I'm assuming is the same armor that you finished X4 with, but there are still Dr. Light capsules to find. There are 2 suits of armor this time around, but now you actually have to completely assemble each armor before you're able to use it, which totally strips away the rewarding sense of progression and character improvement that I loved from the previous games. This was dumb. This was a change they made to the series for the sole purpose of making a change, not because it had any positive effect on the gameplay. I don't know, I beat this game back in the day and I had a bit of fun with it, but I did not appreciate the direction the series was going in. So when Mega Man X6 came out, I wasn't interested. I didn't buy it, and in fact the first and only time that I played the game was on the Mega Man X collection on the GameCube. Now I'm gonna be honest here, I was disappointed to some degree with each of the first 4 Mega Man X sequels, but I still enjoyed them. Now obviously none of them were on par with the first game, but they were all still fun. You know, kinda. Mega Man X6, however, was the first game in the series that I truly did not enjoy on any level. This was not a fun game by any stretch of the imagination. The stage design was irritating, confusing, and often tedious, with constant nagging elements that seemed to exist only to deliberately waste your time. Just like in X5, there are 2 suits of armor that you have to fully assemble before you're able to use them because, that was really fun. And the upgrade system is baffling. I mean, look at this. I'm making it work right here, but I honestly can't make heads or tails of it. All I really know is that these upgrades are tied to all these other characters that you have to rescue in the stages. And if you don't get there in time, they are gone, and you permanently lose whatever upgrade they are carrying. That is frustrating. It was becoming increasingly obvious that Capcom had completely lost interest in the series, and were trotting out regular sequels despite rapidly diminishing returns in terms of critical reception and sales numbers. I don't even know if Capcom originally intended to release this outside of Japan. They didn't bother to redub any of the voices in English. Which itself isn't really a bad thing given how awful the English voice actors usually are, but this is just one part of a larger, all-encompassing blur of issues this game had. Starting with the fact that Mega Man X6 shouldn't even have been made in the first place, seeing as how the series seemed to have ended at the end of X5. Mega Man X6 was more than just bad by Mega Man standards. It was frankly just not a very good game at all. Now granted, at the time it was not the worst game that I'd ever played, but it was still bad enough that I'm honestly surprised that Capcom didn't just give up on the X series and end it right then and there. But they didn't. This is the worst game that I've ever played. Now for better or worse, Capcom really attempted to shake things up with Mega Man X7. And there were some changes that I genuinely enjoyed. I'm gonna list them now. I took notes. A new, fully playable main character was added, Axel. And I thought his unique abilities were a good addition to the aging formula. Axel could float like Princess Peach from Mario 2, and he could copy the form of certain enemies, which allowed him to reach areas that were inaccessible to X and Zero. I also really liked the partner system in this game. You entered each stage with 2 of the 3 characters, and you could switch freely between them. I also like the idea of the, dare I say it, RPG-like method of powering up the characters. In addition to the standard methods of discovering hidden heart tanks and Dr. Light capsules, some of the other Maverick hunters you rescued in the stages gave you what were essentially experience points that could be used to upgrade your characters. This is also the first game in the series that I'm aware of anyway, that used the New Game Plus mode. After beating the game for the first time, you could start a new game over and all your character's upgrades would carry over. And let's see, what else? Some of the music tracks were pretty good. And as for what I didn't like about the game, everything else. I hated the half-baked mixture of 2D and 3D gameplay. Most of the levels switch between the 2 perspectives at least once, and it's never not awkward. Every boss battle takes place in a 3D arena, where you often spend half the time fighting with the camera to keep the boss on screen. Worst of all, most sub-weapons are incredibly ineffective, and rarely have enough energy to finish the fight. You're better off just mashing away with whatever your standard weapon is and hoping for the best. This is the central mechanic of the series. How did they screw that up? Trying to turn the X series into a 3D third-person action game also undermined the core gameplay of the series. Capcom incorporated an automatic lock-on targeting system, which makes sense for the 3D sections of the game, but this mechanic carried over into the 2D sections as well. What this basically did was tilt the gameplay completely in favor of X and Axel, who both use ranged weapons. Zero, on the other hand, only uses melee attacks, so he effectively becomes the most useless character in the game. Axel's signature copy ability was a good idea on paper, but in the actual game it's used very seldomly, and it's honestly much more trouble than it's worth. It requires you to charge up a special shot, which is so weak that you have to hit the enemies multiple times before they leap behind their DNA or whatever the hell the game says is going on. Oh, and as a character, Axel is deeply irritating, and he talks like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
I've been waiting for you, traitor. You coward! I hated you from the very beginning. beginning.
Well, that makes 2 of us.
Actually, it makes 3 of us. X, who is the main character of the series, mind you, isn't even playable right away. You have to rescue like 60-something characters before he even becomes playable. And I have to say, I hate this character. He bitches and moans during the entire game, and while we're on the subject, I have to point out that this is the most stunningly awful voice acting that I've ever heard.
To finish things, I've got to do it. To finish this once and for all.
Yeah, let's show that red alert how it's done.
Oh my god, is that Alucard? That's Alucard.
I'm interested in this.
Trust me, Alucard, this game is not worth your time. You're a terrible actor, by the way.
I suppose so.
But everyone is terrible in this game. Alia returns as your operator, and she's constantly shouting to get your attention during the gameplay.
Can you hear me, Axel?
And in between stages, she's explaining basic gameplay mechanics to you over and over again. There's just too much talking in this game, period. It's hard to pinpoint which party is most offensive, but I'm leaning towards the Mavericks themselves.
Welcome to my silly stage. Here goes nothing. Yeah.
Look at me! Look at me! I'm king of the mountain!
Oh, it hurts.
Big cheese? How dare you call me that? I'm the head honcho for crying out loud!
What? No funny? But I try so hard, so hard.
Stop it. Stop it right there. Do you know how hard we work to rebuild this world?
Around and around.
Oh, it's you that's causing my suffering. Okay, whatever you say, I order you to disband this motorcycle gang.
Motorcycle gang? Why, you've gone too far.
If I tear you to pieces, the pain will stop. Wait, I don't want to lose any more. Not even an enemy.
I swear this game is trying to give me an aneurysm.
Burn to the ground! Burn!
Can you hear me, Ed?
Burn to the ground!
Can you hear me, Axel? Can you hear me, Axel?
Triangle! Triangle!
Can you hear me, Zero? Can you hear me, Ed?
Over here! Later! Over here!
Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn!
Here goes nothing! You punk! You punk! You punk! You punk! You punk! Later!
Can you hear me, Ed?
It's one to spin, yeah? Around and around. You didn't like it.
In spite of its incredibly strong debut, the Mega Man X series almost immediately began to depreciate at an exponential rate. Many of Capcom's attempts to innovate the series could at best be described as well-intentioned but poorly executed, and for the most part, all they really accomplished was making each sequel more tedious and less fun than the game that came before it, outside of one shining moment with Mega Man X4. But Capcom wasn't through with Mega Man X just yet. Mega Man X8 was released on the PlayStation 2 in 2004. It addresses every complaint that I've had about the previous games, and I'd honestly say it's one of the best games in the entire series. Granted, I'd also say that's a pretty low bar in the first place.